Bitcoin trend 17 to 21st February 2025. Time to take profits by HotelierCrypto. Next week's data. Let's break down next week's data. Remember, if Monday is a public holiday in the US, the usual Sunday market reaction shifts to Monday instead. Monday, 17 February 2025. US holiday. Washington's birthday. 650 UTCs plus 7. Japan GDP. If Japan's GDP rises, inflation rises. A rising GDP confirms my prediction that the yen will reach 160 plus per USD. If the yen inflates, Bitcoin rises. Why? Because the yen is the third largest source of liquidity in the world. So, if Japan's GDP increases, Bitcoin will go up, since higher GDP means higher inflation. Here's how Monday's candle might look. Tuesday, 18th of February 2025, 22 UTC plus 7, NAHB Housing Market Index. Remember, stock 4P, jobs, unemployment, printing, and housing. The National Association of Home Builders, NAHB, represents house contractors and is the final piece of housing data. We already have data. Existing home sales are up. New home sales are up. Housing starts are up. Building permits are stable. So NAHB should go up. If NAHB goes up, DXY, US dollar index, rises. How does this relate to Bitcoin? A country's funding comes from its people, primarily their money. Housing is something everyone works for, and through mortgages, the government secures its funding. That's why every presidential campaign talks about making homeownership easier. Housing is both a financial pillar and a source of inflation. When house prices rise, inflation rises because home values influence M2 supply. This is only true in the US. Don't try to apply this logic to Thailand or other countries. The world belongs to the US and China. The rest are just tagging along. If NAHB rises, Bitcoin rises because inflation is increasing, and NHB confirms that M2 supply will continue expanding. Here's how Tuesday's candle might look. Wednesday, 19th February 2027, China house prices. Just like in the US, rising Chinese house prices mean yuan inflation. The market bottom is in, proven by China's decision to bail out Vanke, a major real estate company. Bailing out Vanke, which was near bankruptcy, signals that China believes its economic downturn is over, meaning house prices will start rising again, leading to yuan inflation. If Chinese house prices rise, Bitcoin will rise. 20 UTC plus 7, US housing starts. As predicted earlier, if NAHB goes up, housing starts will also rise. Trump's noise is just a distraction from America's financial problems. To boost liquidity, they'll introduce mortgage subsidies. This is a trap. Don't overthink it. If people start saying, HotelierCrypto said this, I'll be in trouble. I've often said that US debt will hit $40 trillion. But where will they borrow from? Given that the US is the world's richest country? Answer, mortgages. Think about it. If you pay off a mortgage, by the end, you've essentially bought two houses, one for yourself and one for the bank, right? In the US, of course, only in the US. Here's how Wednesday's candle might look. Thursday, 20th of February 2025, 08 UTC plus 7, China PBOC loan prime rate. China's loan interest rate will be announced this Thursday. A 3.1% interest rate is already very low. If it stays at 3.1%, Bitcoin will keep rising. If they cut rates further, Bitcoin will rise even more. Bitcoin is always tied to liquidity. Given the current economy, I don't see any scenario where China raises its interest rates. If that happens, Bitcoin will correct. US jobless claims. With Doge still eating into government job contracts, I expect initial jobless claims to rise. Under Biden, the NFP, non-farm payroll, is mostly government jobs, and this cost-cutting will continue. If jobless claims rise, DXY will drop. However, jobless claims data isn't as significant as CPI or PCE. I expect Bitcoin to dip slightly after a strong rally. Here's how Thursday's candle might look. Friday, 21st of February 2025, 22 UTC plus 7, existing home sales. Existing home sales are rising. Have you heard that Trump wants to take out a $4 trillion loan for the US? That's why I predicted housing data would rise. If existing home sales rise, DXY rises. Remember, the US dollar has multiple functions. Medium of exchange, used for transactions. Store of value, not all currencies have this. Inflation hedge, even though the dollar inflates, it spreads the inflation globally. Treasury reserve, if US US debt rises, DXY rises. If existing home sales rise, DXY rises. However, this won't push Bitcoin down much because this DXY increase is caused by higher US debt, not economic growth. If US debt rises, Bitcoin rises because debt ensures future inflation. There's also a secondary function: sanctions on non-compliant countries. 22 UTC plus 7, University of Michigan, inflation data. According to posts on X, the inflation target has changed. 2% is the past, the new target is 3%. UMIC confirms this by forecasting 4.3% inflation over the next year. If inflation rises, Bitcoin rises, unless the Fed becomes hawkish and raises interest rates. Could the Fed raise rates above 4.5%? Here's how Friday's candle might look. Basel III Endgame, the Fed's new weapon. Basel III is a set of global banking regulations by the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. The goal is to set capital standards for banks so they can survive crises. Only banks with $100 billion plus in assets are required to follow these rules. My opinion? Powell's Basel III Endgame is designed to increase demand for the US dollar so the US can keep exporting inflation. Any country that doesn't comply will get a dose of US-style democracy. Raising capital requirements equals increasing reserve requirement ratios, which forces more people to hold dollars even when the dollar inflates. The Fed wants the world to be its exit liquidity for its unsustainable debt. If this happens, DXY will rise. The smart countries will increase their gold reserves. The clueless ones will become the Fed's exit liquidity. If this happens, DXY will rise. But if countries find a way to avoid holding US dollars, Bitcoin will rise. One possible solution, holding Bitcoin as a reserve asset. But of course, the US will still control that narrative. America is insanely smart. Final disclaimer. Anyway, this is still a long way off. Let me remind you, this is just my fictional story and should not be used as financial advice. Think of it like a Korean drama. I want you all to be addicted to my stories, so you keep treating me to food. If you use this as financial advice, you'll lose money and be stuck for years. Do your own research, but also don't trust your own research. And remember, never blame influencers. Disclaimer: crypto investments are high risk. Your investment decisions are your responsibility. No government or financial authority will compensate for your losses.